Hey kids, welcome to practicing washes in context. This is the assignment here that you can see, and we're going to use the most popular washes, and we're going to practice them in a typical study fashion, but we're also going to put them to use in a little more lifelike situation with some trees and rocks and things. So we're going to start with dry brush. And if you can see how I'm picking up paint with a little bit of water on the brush, but I'm pulling the majority of the water off of the brush with my fingers, and then I'm scraping up or picking up dried paint out of my palette. That paint in that palette has been dried from a day or two ago. And then you rub the brush sideways across the texture of the paper, and that's how you're going to get that mostly dry paint to remain on the high points of your paper. Okay? And while we're working on this next section, focus on the idea of less paint with each stroke. And so this is your graded wash practice. And this is the most important wash that you need to learn how to create. And you need to learn how to create it in a lot of different formats, a lot of variety. Sometimes you're using the water of the cup to dilute the paint on your brush. Sometimes you're going to use a paper towel, and just learn how to master the varieties and the different ways of creating that nice value shift through a graded wash. You really want to see a good shift from dark to light as you practice it. Make it obvious. So flat wash is slightly different, where we're going to reload each and every time. There we go. We want it to be consistent throughout the space. Okay. And the damp brush lift technique cannot be done until there's paint there to work with. So we're going to paint this box, and then we're going to come back to it. So just use a dark color. Brown is great. And you can practice one of the washes if you want to practice flat wash or graded wash, whatever. Practice one of those and let it dry. We'll come back to it. Wet and wet is another popular wash, and we've probably already talked about all of these in other assignments, but wet and wet really makes use of the randomness of the water, the chaos that happens with water. And the best watercolor artists learn how to use that to their advantage. So play with it a little bit, like I'm doing here. Use some different colors. Try to leave some white space. Don't fill the whole thing with color. Okay? So now you can see I have a tree, a dead tree, more or less, and then I have some rocks that are drawn in the remainder of this assignment. And so now we're going to put some, or at least maybe all of these techniques to use. I think if I remember right, I used all of them. So we're going to start with mixing some ultramarine blue. We're going to mix it with some burnt umber, and that's going to give us a really awesome gray, believe it or not. And like all watercolor subjects, backgrounds, most things, we want to start light. So I'm laying in the lightest values that I think I'm going to have in these particular subjects. And then I come to always darken it up. So you have to think this way constantly, light to dark, knowing that you can always bring in more dark. And you can, with damp brush lift, you can lighten some things up a little, but you are limited. So there we go. I've put in my shadows. little bit of graded wash happening thanks to the water. Sometimes the water can do the graded wash for you. Same skill here, only with different shapes. And pay attention to the wetness of color. Notice that there's a significant amount of water on that brush. We, as watercolor artists, we don't ever paint straight out of our tube or straight out of our little buckets of color, depending on what type of paint you're using. We always want to use diluted, watered down paint. Okay, now you can see here I'm kind of changing it up a little bit, breaking a rule. I'm going, we talk about going light to dark, but I just want to put this shadow in right away. So we're doing a graded wash right from the start on this rock. And that allows me to separate it from the two rocks in the foreground. Notice how the two lower rocks now pull forward because of the way I placed that shadow. But now I can come in and put in another graded wash and create the shadow on the lower left rock. Different brush. Make sure you're using the proper brush for the size of object that you're painting. You don't want to be too big or too small. So look and think about what's going to be the best size for the subject that you're painting. And notice that I'm picking up paint here. I'm using the brush as a vacuum. See how I pull out the water on my brush, and then I'm lifting paint out. So this is a different version of lift. There's damp brush lift, and then there's also when your paint is still wet, you can vacuum with a dry brush. Vacuum up your paint and lift out your highlights before they get set. See how I do that? Vacuum it up. Grade it out. Now vacuum it up. So you can have a lot of control if you learn how to use that vacuum. Use your brush as a vacuum. Here's the other way, using paper towel. And so with my damp brush now, since that color has been set and it's now dry, now this is a traditional damp brush lift where I can go back in and lift my highlight out of the color, out of the dark color. So it's always best if you can preserve your highlights, in my opinion, but being able to go back and erase and lift or accentuate a highlight, I think is a great skill that you need to know. It will save you here and there and really make for a nice high contrast drawing or painting, sorry. Okay. We're going to do some, looks like I'm lifting out. We're going to lift out some highlights now out of the tree. So same technique, so we're putting it into practice. Try to lift some highlights out of your tree so that you can get some nice texture and reveal the shape of your tree a little bit more. You notice I'm kind of going around that knot, lifting out highlights that will help accentuate the shape of this tree. Now, I've painted a million trees, and I know some of the shapes just from all of that experience. If you really wanted to make this the best, you could find a really great reference photo to work from. I think that would help you. But you can also use this. See if you if you would like, you can always zoom in and try and copy my tree. Create the same types of highlights if you can, and develop a really lifelike tree. Hope you're having fun with this. With all the arts, it's important to have fun. Don't stress too much if it's not working out the same way mine is. I've had a lot of practice. Give yourself time, give yourself the room to fail, and make it fun.